Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I think it's morning, but as I'm recording this lecture a week and a half before it's actually due to take place, for which I greatly apologize. I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you today. I really wanted to come, but I take part in TFAF every year, and unfortunately TFAF coincided with the day of my lecture, so I'm very sorry. And I'm going to be lecturing you about the two markets that exist for the Russian avant-garde. There's the market one, inevitably, and there's market two. Now, I'm extremely sorry not to be able to show this to you direct, so I'm going to use the miracles of modern technology, and I'm going to record my voice over my slides. This is the last you will see of me, though I'm hoping that we can set up a Skype link if that's necessary, if you have any questions. So without further ado, I shall start. Good morning, one and all. Again, I'm greeting you again, which is awfully stupid. Now, here is my text about my lecture. First of all, an important disclaimer. There are no pictures of any fakes in this lecture. I'm leaving it entirely for you to decide whether the pictures that I'm showing you are dubious, are of doubtful authenticity, or indeed are fakes. So this lecture is designed to make you decide whether things are fake or not. Now, this lecture is actually has some kind of an official recognition, if you like, from the International Confederation of Antique and Art Dealers of Russia and the CIS, which involves all the leading dealers and the leading museums. Indeed, I have lectured at the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow on this very subject. Now, this organization, this Russian organization, is recognized by SINOA. So it is actually an internationally recognized body of museum experts and art dealers. Now, before I start, in addition to my disclaimer, I wish to say a massive thank you to Simon Hewitt and John Helmer, who are very much responsible for part of the material that you are going to hear in this lecture. Right, let us begin with the Nerdler case in New York, one we all know extremely well, and one which is entirely relevant to what I'm going to say. Martha Parrish, who helped draft the Code of Ethics for the Art Dealers Association of America, testified at the Nerdler trial as follows. If the dealer is offered an artwork at below market price, she should be very suspicious. If there is no provenance, you would want to investigate it. So if there's no provenance, you need to know why. And if there is a provenance, you must investigate it. Now, if you're all offered a large collection of works sharing those kind of issues, then, of course, you're not going to touch it. No provenance, low market price, something's wrong. And faced with the sort of collection that Rizal is offered to Nerdler in that particular case, as Mrs. Parrish beautifully put it, a reputable and responsible art dealer would run like hell. So take into account, please, these four positions. Suspicious, investigate, you're not going to touch it, you're going to run like hell. Right. The two Russian avant-garde art markets. There is Market 1, major London and New York auction houses, the major museums, the leading dealers. Market 2 is the minor European auction houses. There are no major museums and no leading dealers. Market 1, Market 2. Now, Market 2, our friends here, the minor auction houses and no major museums and no leading dealers, greatly loves Market 1, which is represented by the major London and New York auction houses, the major museums and the leading dealers. But there you are. That's what Market 2 thinks of Market 1. All thumbs up, ticking every box. Now, what does Market 1, which is represented by the leading London auction houses, dealers and museums, now what do they think of Market 2? That's what they think of Market 2. Now, Why do they think this way? So, why does Market 1 view Market 2 like something akin to possibly the Antichrist? Let us examine why. Again, you are the judge. You must judge for yourself whether you think the pictures that I'm going to show you are reputable or not. Let's start with Market 1. At Sotheby's last year, there was a picture by Nikolai Suetin, a pupil of Malevich, of a suprematist textile design. There it is. Provenance, as you can see. It's a state-of-the-artist private collection, Leningrad, Gallery Gmurzhinska, Cologne, and it was acquired from the above in 1994. This picture has a recognizable provenance. Further to that, it was exhibited at the Gallery Gmurzhinska in 1992, and it is in no less than 4 publications. So, this picture has provenance, has exhibition history, and is in various books. Here's Market 2, an auction of March of last year, 2016, at Tajan in Paris. Again, I really must say a huge thank you to my friends John Helmer and Simon Hewitt for finding out this information. And here we have a drawing by Ilya Chashnik, who is another of Malevich's pupils, an architecton from 1925-1927. Now, this picture also has a recognizable provenance, the Kostakis collection in Greece. And for those of you who don't know about the Kostakis collection in Greece, George Kostakis was the most extraordinary gentleman who went and hoovered up vast quantities of the Russian avant-garde direct from the families of the artists, and is, in my opinion, responsible for saving the entire genre. Now, this picture was not exhibited. There's no literature, but it has a certificate of authenticity by Mr. Alexander Azarmatsev. So, this is our supporting evidence. The provenance is from the famous Kostakis collection, but it hasn't been exhibited, which is odd because most things in the Kostakis collection were not exhibited but shown in a very famous book of 1982 by Rudenstein. It does, however, have a certificate from Mr. Alexander Azarmatsev. So let us compare the two. On the left, we have Market 1, Sotheby's, the 29th of November 2016, the Suetin, and its provenance, it's exhibited, and it's in 4 different books. On the right, we have the Chashnik, which has a magnificent provenance from the Kostakis collection in Greece, but it was never exhibited. It's not in any book. It does, however, have a certificate of authenticity by Mr. Azarmatsev. You must decide what I now say is rubbish or the truth. Pre-sale. This is the Tajan catalogue from the 8th of March. Here is the picture, and as we can see, sadly, I haven't learned to electronically put my finger on the screen, but we can see the provenance is George Kostakis, Greece. Above it, we can also see the certificate from Mr. Azarmatsev. So there is our supporting evidence. This is in the catalogue pre-sale. However, the work came to our notice when John Helmer contacted the auction house, because I wrote to John Helmer and said, John, I think you should investigate this picture. It doesn't look right. John wrote to the auction house, who didn't reply initially. He therefore wrote to the Kostakis Museum in Salonika. This is the letter that he got. Because, of course, this work came to our notice before the auction. Such a work never belonged to the Kostakis collection. This was false provenance. So, somehow, a picture with a false provenance has got into a Paris sale. Then, further to that, it has come to my attention that on March the 8th, your company will auction lot 46 by Ilya Chashnik, provenance which is attributed to Kostakis collection. I have to inform you that this particular piece never belonged to my late father's collection. A letter from Aliki Kostakis. So, why is this picture in this auction with a false provenance? This is the after sale notice. You'll notice that there is no mention now of the Kostakis collection. However, our certificate is still in there. Let's go to another picture at that particular sale at Tajan. Again, thank you, John and Simon, for your superb work on this. Here is a Suprematist cross by Chashnik. No provenance on this occasion. There isn't even a fake provenance. It's never been exhibited, never been in any book. Its estimate is 18 to 20,000 euros. And yet again, we have a certificate by Mr. Azarmatsev. That is the supporting document to confirm the authenticity of this picture. I'm now going to offer you a contrast picture by the same artist. This is a small work on paper. It is not an oil. It is Ilya Chashnik's Vertical Axis in Motion. It is 28 by 21, so it's a small work. This is the provenance. Artist's son, Leonard Hutton, private collection, Belgium. It has a verifiable provenance, and it was first exhibited in New York at a groundbreaking and brilliant exhibition called Ilya Chashnik Watercolors Drawings Release at the Leonard Hutton Galleries in 1979, since which time it has been exhibited at LACMA, the Hirshhorn Museum, Archer Huntington Gallery, again at Leonard Hutton, but most importantly of all, it was exhibited at the groundbreaking Great Utopia exhibition in 1992 at the Stedelijk, the Kunsthalle in Frankfurt, and the Guggenheim. This is the supporting evidence for this picture. Now, let us compare and contrast. You must judge, not me. I'm not saying anything about this picture on the left. You must compare and contrast the oil by Chashnik on the left and the watercolor by Chashnik on the right. On the left, we have a picture going into a Paris auction with no provenance, no exhibition history, and no literature, but it does have a certificate by Mr. Azarmatsev. On the right-hand side, we have the provenance, the exhibition history of a small work on paper. Compare and contrast. Market 1 versus Market 2. Right. Most importantly here is, do you remember what Martha Parrish said about if you find a picture that is much lower than market price, you should be very suspicious. All right. Well, the price of the picture on the left, and oil, I hasten to add, is 18 to 20,000 euros. The price of the work on paper on the right has an estimate of 120 to 150,000 euros. So how is it that an oil by one artist can have an estimate that's 10 times less than a work on paper of the same period? Big problem. What else did Martha Parrish said? She said that if there was no provenance, you'd be suspicious too. If there's no literature or exhibition history, you'd want to investigate it. But there is none. There's nothing to investigate. The evidence that we have here that this is a suspicious work is the price, the incredibly low price. But, hey, we've got a certificate from Mr. Azarmatsev. So, Market 1, I'm terribly sorry, I managed to get these all mixed up, but Market 1, which has the evidence of the Great Utopia exhibition, the exhibition in New York, and has a provenance going back to the artist's son, is up against a picture of far lower estimate with the certificate on the right. There it is, by Mr. Azarmatsev, saying that this picture is by Chashnik. The oil was unsold at 18,000 euros. The watercolor sold for 200,000 euros. Now, I believe as a dealer, well, I would say this, that the market is usually the judge. So, there's a very good reason why the picture on the left didn't sell and the picture on the right did sell. And as you know, my belief is because the picture on the right has a massive provenance and exhibition history and can be traced back to the artist's son, it's going to have a market. But the picture on the left, which has no provenance, no exhibition history, and has never been illustrated anywhere, has got no market. But I'm interested to know why it's at an auction at all. Now, back we go to Mrs. Parrish. This picture is lower than the market price, has no provenance. If you're offered a whole collection of works sharing these issues, in other words, we don't have a whole collection, but we have 2 Chashniks. There were other pictures at this auction which also had low estimates with no provenance and exhibition history. Faced with these sort of pictures, you're gonna do what? You're gonna put on your running shoes and you're gonna do the 3,000-meter sprint at a speed you've never done before, because you're not going to touch it. I'm asking you to judge. Am I talking rubbish or am I talking sense? I don't know. However, this was the pre-sale conversation that took place between some nameless person and the auction house. Who was the owner of this picture? A French dealer. And before that, who owned it? An American journalist who knew the artist. Then, I have to confess, the person who asked these questions was the extremely arrogant English gentleman who is currently lecturing you, because I want to know. Maybe it's genuine. If it's genuine, I'm going to try and buy it. But I asked them provenance questions. These are the answers I got. So, who was the owner? A French dealer. Fair enough. Before that, an American journalist who knew the artist. So I said, okay, fine. Let's find out the name of that particular person. Between which dates did he acquire it? And who was he exactly? This is the answer I get from the auction house. I don't have any dates. The painting has a certificate from Mr. Azarmadzev. All right. So the auction house is now, to all intents and purposes, admitting there's no provenance, but they are saying there's a certificate from Mr. Azarmadzev. I then asked, is Mr. Azarmadzev recognized by Christie's and Sotheby's? Because we have our Market 1 represented by the 2 main auction houses, the leading museums and the leading dealers. Very interesting. This is the answer I got. I don't know the policies of our competitors. If you look on the internet, you will find that Mr. Azarmadzev is well known. Then, which I thought was slightly rude, if you have any doubts, don't bid. Well, I have major doubts, and I'm not going to bid, but I want to be sure that what I'm buying is genuine. Again, I don't know. I'm asking you to decide. So, what I thought was quite interesting was, if you look on the internet, you will find that Mr. Azarmadzev is well known. Well, I was delighted to hear that Mr. Azarmadzev is well known. Anyway, my answer was, surely as the seller, you want to be 100% sure of authenticity. Do you provide this guarantee? Again, I think this is a reasonable question if I'm going to shell out 20,000 euros for a picture. The answer, Mr. Azarmadzev, the expert, guarantees authenticity, and that is good enough for us. Great. I'm delighted to hear it. That's their position. Fine, no problem. Now, if we look on the internet, we'll find that Mr. Azarmadzev is well known. Right. My friend Simon Hewitt, therefore, spent a day or two looking for Mr. Azarmadzev on the internet. There is no mention of Mr. Azarmadzev, which I must tell you is an extremely uncommon name, at the Paris address on his certificate. So there's a certificate from Mr. Azarmadzev, but there's no mention of him at the address which is on his certificate. This is very odd for an art expert. Mr. Azarmadzev, as we know, the expert guarantees authenticity. That's enough for us. However, Mr. Azarmadzev, when challenged about whether he guarantees authenticity, replied, as an art historian, I am not competent to guarantee a work's provenance unless specifically mandated to do so. Well, this is looking already a little bit odd. Then there is no mention of Mr. Alexander Azarmadzev as an arts expert on the internet. So, hang on a second, I thought he was well known on the internet. Well, it appears he isn't. Now, Simon, who is a very humorous gentleman, found out that the first Alexander Azarmadzev who's listed on the internet is the head of computer simulation at Tambov University. The next entrance is a drummer with a rock group called Bearing Straight. There are 24 Alexander Azarmadzevs on Facebook, but none of them are experts. So who is this well-known Mr. Azarmadsev. There is also no mention of Alexander Azarmadsev, which I've spelt wrong. My apologies. It should say Alexander Azarmadsev as an art expert in Cyrillic. The first mention is an ice hockey player for the mighty Akuli Sakhalin. Sakhalin is an island near Vladivostok. So there's the first page of internet searches for Mr. Azarmadsev. Okay, the next person is an honoured worker of science. And only on the second page of internet search is there this famous person with a very uncommon name as an art expert, where he's mentioned in an article by Patricia Railing, a very old friend of mine, president of INCORM. Simon wrote to INCORM, to their president, Mrs. Railing, my best friend, and it stands for the International Non-Competent Organization of Russian something or others. Anyway, INCORM represents a group of art historians. We're going to talk a lot more about INCORM later on. But Mr. Azarmadsev is referred to in this article. So Simon, as is normal, and taking into account all the above information, wrote to Mrs. Railing asking for information about this famous art historian. But I'm afraid to say Mrs. Railing refused to answer Simon's letters. Again, I'm getting tired of doing these lectures because I greatly enjoy it. But honestly, why doesn't somebody stop these people from writing certificates? Anyway, this is a mere formality. You must decide yourselves what you think is genuine and what you think isn't genuine, not me. Now, let us deal with INCORM, the International Confederation of Russian, I don't know what it stands for. Here we are, modernism. Wow, well, they've got some very postmodern views on the authentication of pictures. Two more members of INCORM are Anthony Parton and Denise Bazatou. Let us examine their contribution to art history. In 2010, the book by Anthony Parton came out on Gontcharova, and Mrs. Bazatou did her version of Natalia Gontcharova in 2011. So these are two huge art books. Both of them were published in the West. Now, let us examine this incontrovertible fact that I keep telling the entire universe about, but nobody seems to take it seriously. There are 300 oils by Gontcharova painted pre-1914 when she left for the West. These are documented in two lists by Egan Buri and Vinogradov, and at a 1913 retrospective of the artist in Moscow. We know where 148 of these pictures are. 130 have full provenance and exhibition history as well, and only 22 pictures are unaccounted for. Therefore, we know of 300 oils by Gontcharova painted pre-1915, of which only 22 we don't know where they are. So that makes 300. But Mrs. Bazatou, bless her little heart, has produced a book where this number has suddenly leapt to 460 pictures by Gontcharova. So let us examine why. And again, you are the judge. You must judge, not me. Let's hit position number one, The Wrestlers by Gontcharova. One is in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris, one's in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. So Gontcharova, unusually for her, repeated this theme. She painted this particular subject twice. However, in Anthony Parton's book, oh my God, we found a third example of Wrestlers by Anthony Parton. No provenance. The words private collection are not a provenance. What did Mrs. Parrish say? If you see a picture without a provenance, you are going to be suspicious. But it's authenticated by Anthony Parton and reproduced in this big book. I think there's reason to be suspicious of this picture on stylistic grounds. But when you look at this particular photograph of the All-Russian French Wrestling Championships of 1910, oh my God, you can see the inspiration for this picture, can't you? So, I'm not saying this picture is a fake because, courtesy of some charming lawyers, I've stopped using the word fake. But I'm asking you, the audience, intelligent people, is this picture really by Gontcharova? Is it possibly by Gontcharova? Oh dear, it's so depressing. You judge. Now, another little thing. Let's have a look at Irina. Let's have a look at Mrs. Bazatou's book on Gontcharova. And I like this quote because it's a very nice lady who works at the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, which holds, incidentally, the largest collection of Goncharova's work, as well as her archive. And let's have a look at the picture, The Cyclist, which is a mind-goppingly brilliant futurist picture of 1912 to 1913, which is in the Russian Museum. Now, Mrs. Vakar came up with this terrific quote about Gontcharova. Her contemporaries were struck by the diversity of her work, the richness of fantasy. She hardly ever repeated a composition. Okay, so let's take those words and remember it. She hardly ever repeated a composition. Boom, there it is. She hardly ever repeated a composition. She hardly ever repeated a composition. You see, I can do this in time when I've got my microphone on. She hardly ever repeated a composition. There's the final one. This is the two-wheel push bike that's founded in the year 2000. But they're all in Mrs. Bazatou's book. So there it is, page 138 of Natalia Gontcharova, son œuvre entre tradition et modernité, her work between tradition and modernity. And I ask you to have a look, if you can see it clearly enough, the right-hand page. This is The Cyclist. Right. So 765, private collection, 766, private collection, 767, private collection, 768, Moscow Museum of Modern Art, no comment, 769, private collection, 771, private collection, 772, private collection, 770, oh my goodness gracious me, the whole caboodle, the whole shooting match, provenance, exhibition history, literature, the works. What did Mrs. Parrish say? If you see a picture without provenance, you're going to investigate it. If you see lots of pictures without provenance, you're going to run like hell. You're going to turn into Usain Bolt and run for the next continent. But why are there 7 versions of The Cyclist in this book? Gontcharova hardly ever repeated a composition, but we've suddenly got 7 new ones in this book. But then Mrs. Bazatou has found 160 new pictures by Gontcharova. Then let's talk about money. This picture, the man on the push bike, came up at auction with an estimate of 800 to 1 million euros. And it didn't sell. The world record for Gontcharova is 10 million euros. If this picture had provenance, exhibition history, bibliography, and so on and so forth, this picture would have been 10 to 15 million. Mrs. Parrish, if a picture is under market value, you're going to be suspicious. I was suspicious. Now, a signature for a signature for Gontcharova is a great rarity. She very seldom signed. But here I'm showing you the 7 bicyclists, of which you are now well familiar, and I'm going to show you the wrestlers, which you're also familiar on, and I'm going to show you 4 other examples of pictures in this book by Denise Bazatou and in the book by Anthony Parton, which are all signed. Now, as a dealer in Russian art, if I see a picture that is signed, you would be surprised to hear that my first reaction after 35 years of experience is to be suspicious. Now, I'm suspicious. All of these pictures are signed, yet we know as a fact that Gontcharova hardly ever signed her pre-13 1913 pictures. Something's wrong. Now, Mrs. Railing represents these two dealers, these two art historians, Mr. Parton and Mrs. Bazatou. So, Mrs. Railing represents them at Inkhorn. Therefore, we, as a Russian federation, wished to discuss the contents of these books, because, as you can imagine, the Russians went stark raving bonkers when Natalia Goncharova's oeuvre suddenly increased by 160 pictures. Therefore, the International Confederation of Art Dealers of the CIS and Russia, which also incidentally involves major museum figures, invited Mrs. Railing and Dr. Parton and Mrs. Bazatou to Moscow to see the exhibition of Gontcharova at the Tretyakov Gallery. So, from October 2013 to February 2014, we agreed there would be a press conference, and they wished to discuss with Bazatou and Parton and Mrs. Railing the books that I have just shown you. And just to make it easier, the Confederation agreed to pay all flights, hotels, and other expenses. This was a freebie. They could come to Moscow for free, for no money. Well, they didn't have spending money. They could have bought a few Russian dolls, a couple of bottles of vodka, maybe even some caviar. We invited them to come to see the exhibition themselves, to come and see Goncharova's main body of work in the Tretyakov Gallery. Did we get an answer? Oh, no, we didn't. And we followed up the letter to ask why we hadn't had an answer. Now, if these people are going to bloody well write certificates, could they at least defend themselves in public? But they won't. You decide, are those genuine pictures by Gontcharova? Or are they not? I don't know. I'm just your humble... That's not true. I'm just your rather arrogant lecturer from England. Now, Mrs. Railing, who, as you can imagine, is about to become the mother of my children, doesn't like me very much because I want to know why. I genuinely want an answer from her as to why this organization writes these books with, quite frankly, slightly unusual pictures in them. Anyway, Mrs. Railing thought she'd have a pop at me, which was quite amusing because she wrote on a blog that a certain individual in London, she wouldn't mention me by name, who sells minor Russian works of art, that was extraordinary, has been hired by a tycoon who rewards him every time he declares a work to be blank. Anyway, I mean, you got to admire her. I mean, maybe she wasn't referring to me, but I kind of think she was referring to me. Anyway, apparently, I've been hired by the Onassis family to say the word, a particular word, and every time I say this word, I'll be given a little treat. I'll be given a gift. So this tycoon has hired me, and every time I say the word fake, I get paid. Well, first of all, this is a scandalous suggestion. This individual has nothing to recommend him by way of qualifications, expertise, or information about the works. She's absolutely right. I have nothing to recommend me by way of qualifications, expertise, or information. So why don't you come out of your small cave, Mrs. Railing, and defend yourself? Why do I and many other people think that what your colleagues are writing, and indeed what you're writing, may be of a slightly suspicious nature? I'm inviting you to come to Russia. I will pay for you to come to Russia, and Mr. Parton and Mrs. Bazatou, for you to come and talk. Come and talk to us. Let's see what's going on. I want to know why no museum, no major auction house, and no major dealer of Russian art will touch pictures which are reproduced in these books, which have certificates of authenticity by either Mrs. Bazatou or Dr. Parton. Anyway, I am, as you can see from Mrs. Railing, clearly a gentleman of nothing, who has nothing to recommend him. My wife might well agree with her, but the fact is that I am a dealer, And as a dealer, I have to be sure that what I'm selling is guaranteed by the auction market. I can't sell things that no dealer, no museum, and no leading auction house is then going to turn around and go, well, actually, we can't accept this. However, I'm still getting paid massive amounts of money every time I say the word fake, which, as you can imagine, is an accusation that I really do find faintly amusing. Anyway, now Mrs. Railing then goes further into the attack because she says, and one must admire her, that my norms for authentication, if indeed she's referring to me, are exhibition history of a work and provenance. God, it's so tiresome, it's so boring. This darling lady wishes to rewrite the entire rules of the art world. I have an assertion, according to her, that if a picture has no exhibition history, it cannot be considered authentic. And without a full provenance, a work cannot be considered authentic. Isn't that ridiculous? Exhibition history? Provenance? I must be mad. Because of course an exhibition's got to have a provenance. Of course it has. It's otherwise, how can it be considered genuine? These miracle pictures that float from out of the ether, how can they be genuine? I'm not saying they are. I'm far too scared to say things are fake nowadays. But how can it be? I'm asking you to judge. You must judge. If a picture has no provenance and no exhibition history, Martha Parrish, who is a far more distinguished member of planet Earth than I am or ever will be, she says, don't touch pictures without provenance. Don't touch pictures which are lower than market value. Don't touch pictures that aren't in any books. That's what Martha Parrish is saying. It's what I'm saying too. But Mrs. Railing thinks that this is an extraordinary approach. She clearly thinks it's the wrong approach. So what's the right approach? Let me ask that. Here we go again. We're quoting Mrs. Parrish. You should be suspicious. You want to investigate it. You're not going to touch it. And you're going to run like hell if you're faced by pictures with that. I've just been offered a Gontcharova for 2.8 million, which its only claim to being authentic is that it's reproduced in Mrs. Bazatou's book. If it was by Gontcharova, it would be 10 to 15 million euros for starters, but it would need to have a provenance. It would need to have an exhibition history. We'd need to know about this picture. The only supporting evidence that the picture that I was offered for 2.8 was that it's in her book. Fake. So this is poor little me. I don't really look like that, by the way. I'm much better looking. There's me. Every time I say fake, I get paid. Oh, it's just so laughable. You know, I'm trying to bring discussion out. I want people to discuss what's going on. I want there to be debate. I don't want this ridiculous situation where somebody says that I'm being paid every time I said the word fake. I'd have retired and gone off and lived in Capri a long time ago if that was the case. Provenance issues. Sure, now we're dealing with an exhibition that took place recently in a country not very far from Italy. This is what the leading expert at the Tretiakov Gallery, the guardian of the Russian avant-garde, said. I have only seen the catalogue, not the exhibition itself, but it is abundantly clear that every work at the exhibition is fake. Quote, unquote, Tanya Gontcharova in the Arts newspaper. This is concerning an exhibition that took place in a little town not a million miles from Bologna. And this is the provenance of the works that are at this exhibition. Precious relics saved from a shipwreck. Right? So that's the provenance. As we know, I have a real problem when there's no provenance. When the provenance is quoted as being precious relics saved from a shipwreck, I really do want to head for the hills. Now, just on the notion of provenance, let's deal with style. I asked my 8-year-old daughter, well, she was 8 at the time, are these two pictures painted by the same artist? And my 8-year-old daughter said, of course they're not painted by the same artist. But the picture on the left was exhibited in a very small museum in Italy. The picture on the right is purportedly by the same artist, but is in a museum in Moscow. So this is an 8-year-old who can tell the difference between this. I think what I'm trying to say is these pictures are supposed to have been painted by the same artist, but my daughter said they haven't been painted by the same artist. Same here. She said exactly the same thing here. The picture on the left is by Rozanova, purported to be. The picture on the right is definitely by Rozanova. But are they painted by the same artist? Because the picture on the left is a clear attempt to reproduce the artistic thinking behind the picture on the right. But they're so clearly painted by different artists. Well, again, I'm not saying they are, but my 8-year-old daughter, she's saying they are. Again, you judge. Now, at this exhibition was a real stormer of a picture that actually really does make me want to go and sit in a little shepherd's hut high in the Tuscan hills and drink Barolo and eat manchego and parmigiano and learn Italian and just become some kind of a hermit, because how do you spell commune? This is a picture that was at a public exhibition. Kaboom! On the left is the picture that says Comuna on it, Petra Comuna, and on the right is the genuine picture by Nathan Altman. It's in the Russian museum. It's called the Petra Comuna. It's a famous picture in a museum in Russia. The picture on the left was at this exhibition in a little place not so very far from Bologna. They can't spell commune in Russian properly. Can you believe it? Commune in Russian has 2 M's. The picture on the left has only got 1 M. But then, in Italian, the word commune also only has 1 M. So, please, while I'm asking you to judge and you yourselves must decide which of these pictures is a fake or not. I mean, it's so insulting to me as a lover of Russian art to see a picture where the person who's painted the picture can't even spell commune right. Now, of course, there is an argument to suggest that very, very possibly Altman didn't know how to spell commune, but I kind of think he probably did. Now, the person who blew the whistle on all these pictures got sued. Sued by the Tribunale di Milano. So, for pointing out that the people can't spell, for pointing out that an 8-year-old can spot the difference between the 2 pictures, and for pointing out that this kind of provenance is a joke, and for backing up what the Tretyakov Gallery said about all these pictures, he was sued. Let's remember the Parrish golden rules again. Be suspicious, investigate provenance, don't touch it, run like hell. The Butterwick golden rules are as follows. If the picture has no provenance, or it's something ludicrous like it's saved from a shipwreck, there's no exhibition history, but it's got a certificate expertise, or, which we haven't really discussed purely because there's no time for it, a certificate of chemical expertise, or it's signed, or it's cheaper than the market price. I feel like I'm turning into a parrot. What are you going to do when, given these set of circumstances, Martha Parrish, who is, as I said, much more distinguished than myself, agrees? What are you going to do? You're going to be suspicious. You're going to investigate provenance. You're not going to touch it. And you're going to run like hell. But what is the answer? How do we stop all this happening? First of all, you've got to have freedom of speech. Because the person who was sued was asked his opinion of the exhibition where the picture that was missold was. And he gave his opinion. And his opinion was based on certain facts. He didn't just come out and say these pictures are fake. He came out and said these pictures are fake because they are not recognized by any major museum, any dealer, or any auction house. So if they're not, there must be something wrong with them. And there must be protection for leading dealers, art historians, auction houses, museums to say what they like. But I think most importantly of all, I think you need to listen to the market, because hundreds of years of experience of the market tells you. Now, the Russian market is very specific because, of course, the European market and the Russian market are different. But the Russian market has kind of infested the Western market, and the Western market has become very confused about how to deal with it. There is also further answers. You must stand up for journalism. Good quality journalism must be supported at all costs. Then you've got to have proper catalogue raisonnés. The trouble is, with Russian art, there are no catalogue raisonnés. There was a congress recently at The Hague in 2014, and a publishing work group was set up for the guidelines for compiling a catalogue raisonné. The work group members are Vivian Barnett, Gillian Nadolny, Katie Rogers, Eddie Shevmaka, Maria Velikov. Right, these are all distinguished people, and they're setting up the guidelines for a catalogue raisonné so that we don't have these problems anymore. I myself, as a dealer, have a role to play because I'm promoting the work of Alexander Bogomazov, the totally brilliant Ukrainian Cuba futurist. Now, all the pictures that I've dealt with Bogomazov over the years have got a provenance, an exhibition history, and I can trace them back to the family. I've even set up a committee of Bogomazov, which consists of the granddaughter of the artist. So I've got extremely convincing evidence to support the authenticity of all the pictures. And then something really wonderful happened to Bogomazov. These are 6 pictures by Bogomazov that I, as a dealer, exhibited at TIFAF Maastricht. These pictures were bought by the Kröller-Müller Museum. Now, as a dealer, this is a fantastic thing to happen. And you must, as a dealer, give discounts to institutions. Pictures must go to institutions because when pictures are in institutions, they can be studied properly. I very much doubt that any of the pictures that I've shown you today that are of the dubious type, they're not fakes, they're dubious, I doubt whether any institution would ever touch any of those pictures. Now, there are 4 Bogomazovs hanging up in the Kröller-Müller Museum in front of a statue of Boccioni. Now, first of all, this is marvellous for the artist. It's marvellous for me as a dealer. I can't deny it. But given the choice, my dealer friends would all argue the same as I do, which is we'd far rather things went to institutions than they did to private individuals, because in institutions, they become public property and can be investigated, and we don't have the problems of these absurd books coming out and these ridiculous pictures coming up at auction, which have no provenance or exhibition history. Now, the other thing to do, of course, is to organise public exhibitions of the artists in question. So on the 28th of September 2017, we're doing a major exhibition of Bogomazov in Kiev. Now, you know, you can argue whatever you like, that I'm doing it for financial gain, or I'm doing it for this, or I'm doing it for that. But actually, as a public exercise, we're going to bring 100 pictures from the West that have never been seen in Ukraine, or haven't been seen since the early 1990s, and we're going to show them to the Ukrainian public. This is a fantastic way of helping the process of authentication, because I've just had a run-in with a Belgian auction house about a Bogomazov that they put in one of their auctions, which of course has got nothing to do with Bogomazov. It's an insult to the artist. This is an artist who struggled his entire life, died in terrible agony of tuberculosis, and deserves to be shown to a wider public without being spoiled, without being poisoned. So I'm going to go back to my salient points. In the case of the Russian avant-garde, you've got no provenance, no exhibition history, but it does have a certificate of expertise by Mrs. Railing, by Anthony Parton, by Denise Bazatou, by Mr. Zarmatsov. It's signed. It's cheaper than the market price. and it's got the yippee, the chemical expertise certificate, which proves nothing. It only can prove the age of a picture. It can't prove the authorship. What are you going to do, ladies and gentlemen, when you're presented with those particular facts? You are going to run like hell. Thank you very, very much for listening, and I hope I haven't bored you all rigid.